All right. Good morning, Doug. We're back with the viewer questions. These questions come from members of our Phyle, our private member community. If you're interested in learning what Phyle has to offer, click on the link in the description below. So, Doug, let's get to these questions. The first one here is, why does Doug choose to sell the stock and keep the warrant in a private placement? I'm curious, as I do the opposite of a warrant, because a warrant is in the money and often doesn't stay there long term.
Well, look, the most important rule in investing, and it took me a while to learn this, is don't lose money. And the second rule of investing is remember the first rule. And when you're doing a private placement, and generally speaking with these Canadian stocks, well, it depends on whether you're an American or not, but you can sell the underlying stock in a private placement after either 4 months or a year, depending on your political situation. The way I like to play it is, and of course, when you do a private placement, ideally, you're buying it at a discount to the market, and you're not paying a commission, and you're not having to deal with the bid-ask spreads. So there are advantages to it. And of course, the company gets the money directly, not some other investors. So from that point of view, you can say, well, I'm helping the company. Okay, all that being said, not always, because right now I think we're in a major gold and silver bull market. So oftentimes after my 4-month period expires, I hold both the underlying stock and the warrant because I'm bullish. But good discipline is, as soon as you can, sell the underlying stock and keep the warrant. Don't sell the warrant because they only get into the money, depending, a fraction of the time anyway. And when you sell the warrant, you're giving up all the free upside potential. Get your money back, grab it, and keep free upside potential, as opposed to doing the opposite, where you can still lose 100% of your money after grabbing it. No, you got it backwards. No,
okay.
Sell the stock warrant.
Awesome. Okay. Dennis says he enjoys trading options. He says, I've only ever traded options that I want to own or have owned. I'm curious if Doug, if you have any options trades, any like specifically selling puts or covered calls that are any of your favorites at the moment. Is there anything you're doing there?
No, nothing I can put my finger on at the moment that looks wild and crazy and wonderful. No.
Okay.
But I do it all the time on stocks that I like. And generally, I'm selling puts on oil stocks and oil stocks and mining stocks. And if I feel really bold, I'd sell uncovered calls on things like Pfizer and Moderna, but I'm not right now.
Okay. All right. Doug, let's see. I've been watching a lot of shows on ancient history. Fascinating stuff, really. What is Doug's take on some of the massive structures that were built? Do you have it? Have you visited any? Do you have any opinion on how these things came to be? Like stuff like the pyramids, I guess, but there's a whole bunch of other things that kind of fall into that.
Yeah, the big ones, of course, are the pyramids and other massive structures in Egypt made out of multi-ton stones. They're the biggest. And then, of course, you've got the Aztec pyramids, the Mayan pyramids, and all kinds of Inca structures that have multi-ton stones, and even Stonehenge. As best as I can figure, those stones in Stonehenge came from around 60 miles away, and it's amazing. How did they build these things 3,000 years ago? Well, I don't know. So I've visited them. I'm interested in them. I don't know the answers, and I haven't read any good answers. Well, I've read some answers. Like one archaeologist with an engineering background proposed that the way that they moved the stones to build the pyramids by putting a pole, very thick pole, obviously, in the ground, and then counterbalancing the stone on one side with a heavy weight, swinging it around so it goes like 50 feet at the time, and repeat many times for each stone instead of dragging them, which is much harder. So, but I don't know the answer to these things. Did alien civilizations do it? I doubt it.
Okay. All right. Doug, which two mentors really impacted your life? And what's the most important things you learned from each?
Well, I've talked about this before. And I think first and foremost is Ayn Rand, because she worked out a very internally consistent, logical, and ethical philosophical system and way of thinking. And if you haven't read anything by Rand, I'd start out with her book, which is only, what is it, 100 or 120 pages long, not Virtue of Selfishness. It's an absolutely wonderful book. You should read that. That's number one. Second would be Harry Brown, old friend of mine, big fan of his. And forget about his economics and financial books. Well, don't forget about them. But I think he summed it up nicely in his book, How I Found Freedom in a Non-Free World.
Yeah.
So I'd read that. But I would caution you, there are two editions to it. One is the early edition, which is the one that I hold to. And then there's a later edition when Harry, in his own opinion, became older and wiser. And, well, I think most people do become wiser as they get older. And Harry changed some of his opinions or modified them or toned them down. Well, I'm fine with that too. But I'd get a hold of that book. And from a political point of view, I would read Morris and Linda Tannehill's book, The Market for Liberty, which is free on the internet if you search around, I think. So I think that answers the question.
Yeah, that's great. Next one is, I have $100,000 in precious metals, mostly silver, no other investments so far, apart from prepping assets and a piece of land. Please, could you ask Doug how much in percentage is wise to sell so that one can, so that the cash can be used for investing in mining stocks? Is it a good time, or shall I wait for the spot prices to go up before selling?
Well, first, I'd like to caution everybody, including this person. Mining stocks are burning matches, generally speaking. They're when you talk to skilled, experienced, legitimate investors, and you mention that you play with mining stocks, I think you're
a degenerate gambler.
Exactly, and they're right. They're right. There's no question about it. That said, I like them because they're so volatile and because I know something about mining at this point, and all kinds of reasons that we can go into. But these things are not heirlooms, so don't count them in the position of assets that you're going to keep forever. Practically none of them, frankly, for all kinds of different reasons. But that said, mining stocks are very, very cheap right now by all kinds of parameters. So if you choose to take some money and play with it, and if you're asking the question, obviously you don't have a deep knowledge of markets and mining stocks and mining, and you got to consider them as gambling money. I think it's a really good gamble, or in my case, I'd call it a good speculation. But people that don't know what they're doing, it's a gamble. I think it's a good one right now.
But I think the fundamental issue is he's going from something that really is an heirloom item. I mean, you could look at the gold and silver, and especially if it's mostly silver, it seems like it's, as we talked about a couple episodes ago, very low, priced very lowly right now, valued very lowly, and likely to go up. So he's going from these heirloom assets to things that are burning matches. And it's a fundamentally different strategy that I just would think deeply about it before you do it. Because are you ready? Because you obviously have gone to owning precious metals because you wanted to de-risk yourself in some way, it seems like, and be careful.
Yeah, I'm not sure with the $100,000 you've got enough money to, at this stage, gamble.
Yeah.
So Yeah, you can buy these little mining stocks and maybe you'll get 10 to 1. Maybe you'll do better. I mean, it's quite possible, but it's very dangerous. And the chances are greater that you'll lose your money.
It's also quite possible that silver could triple from here, right? I mean, that's not out of the range of possibilities.
Not at all. Exactly.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay.
Anyway, be careful with the mining stocks, okay?
Be careful.
Good time to buy them, but caution.
Okay. Does Doug know or have any dealings in the past with Ray Dalio?
No, I don't. I've read some of his things that he publishes from time to time, and I've read the operating principles that they publish on the Bridgewater.
For Bridgewater.
Yeah. Well, that's all fine. They're all kind of truisms and generalities, and who can argue with be nice to other people, basically. Yeah, I'm all for it. I think that's great, but way too much emphasis, it seems to me, I don't know, on DEI and ESG and the rest of this nonsense. But that said, can't argue with his success as an investor. He's been spectacular.
Yep. Yes. Okay.
I wouldn't take political or economic advice from him, because being a great investor is very different from being a great economist.
That's right. And you also got to wonder, he's so institutionalized himself with central banks, with sovereign states, including China. Like he talking his book is almost talking the state book, almost talking the central bank book. And so you don't really know at what point his objective or his objectivity is, if it's still there, like it had been historically.
You're right. There's no cosmic breakthroughs that are going to be made by Ray Dalio in the era of original thought or philosophy, as far as I can tell. And if you hang out with these people, the kind of people that show up at WEF, which of course he does, it becomes an echo chamber where you don't want to argue with the people that you're dealing with every day. That's not good. So you presume he agrees with them, basically.
Yeah, have to. All right, Doug, have you ever experienced a miracle?
A miracle. Well, what is a miracle? It's a suspension of the basic laws of physics and reality, essentially. And I've watched, who are the great magicians of today? Chris Angel and David
Copperfield,
and a number of these guys like that. And I've watched their shows, and they're obviously rolling back the laws of physics, but not really. And, I've watched guys that are very good at making cards appear and disappear right before my very eyes at a bar. And is that a miracle? Well, looks like a miracle. So the answer to the question is no, I don't believe I've ever seen a miracle. Although it looks like these guys can perform miracles all the time.
Yeah, I remember as a kid watching Copperfield walk through the Great Wall of China live on ABC. Yeah,
somebody told me that the way he did that was he basically bribed all the Chinese on one side of the wall.
I'd do it. Okay, Doug, do you have any insight as to why the NASDAQ bottomed in late 1974 while the S&P 500 didn't truly find a bottom until mid-1982? You said the S&P did have rallies, but they didn't last, both inflation adjusted or not. There is a dichotomy between the indexes.
Well, that's quite correct. And what he said about the S&P would be even more true of the Dow Jones. The NASDAQ, more in the past than now, is where the junk stocks are. Things that have low capitalization or new companies or high tech, big wreck, speculative issues. And that's still true today. The tech companies are mostly NASDAQ as opposed to S&P. And, once you're on the DJI, you're basically a stodgy old company. So that's the reason why.
So I assume did the same thing happen after the .com crash? I mean, the NASDAQ hit its low way earlier than the Dow did or the S&P?
Yeah. Look, even when we're talking about crappy mining stocks, gold collapses, all the little penny dreadfuls and penny mining exploration stocks, they all go down 95% or 100%. But things like Newmont and Barrick and maybe they'll drop 50 or 60%. It's the same thing. The correlation between the NASDAQ and the S&P and the Dow Jones.
Makes sense.
Kind of
Okay. Okay. This is a question about CBDCs, and I know your answer has to be just speculating, but the guy asked, he said, if I currently have my dollars in a brokerage and US accounts, would every single one of them be, quote, transformed into CBDCs if they became the standard?
I don't think anybody knows the answer to that question yet, because we don't know the actual nature of the CBDCs that they will definitely try to impose on people. I understand that as we speak, ATM machines are being pulled out and are becoming harder and harder to find everywhere. Banks are getting out of the ATM business, which means that's going to become harder and harder to get cash. And banks don't like to deal with cash. So, perhaps when you get your tax refund, most people get tax refunds, apparently. They'll want to put it into a government digital currency account. Maybe it'll start there. So it's unpredictable because we don't have it yet.
Yeah.
But
another currency resets, like, if you're Argentine and whatever money you had in your bank or brokerage account at the time where they reset the currency, it was like forced converted on your behalf, right? I mean, isn't that what has happened before? If you were in the banking system and that state made a currency change of some kind?
Yeah, that certainly happened in Argentina. Well, at this point, it was a generation ago, where people had dollar accounts with foreign banks in Argentina. Well, we're safe. We got dollars, we got a foreign account. Didn't matter. The government just took it and converted them all to pesos. Immediately destroyed the peso. So it was, very clear. They can do anything they want. So what you should do is get as much serious money as you can into small gold and silver coins. 1 ounce silver coins, 1/4 ounce gold coins, I think is the way to fly.
Okay. All right. We did see there was a video that you and I both watched maybe 6 weeks ago or so by this guy, Manekos64, I think is the name of his YouTube account, where he interviewed this Swiss banker and they talked through some of these scenarios. And it was the best sort of summary I've seen of how it might be rolled out using the way it's been done historically. I'll try and find the link to that and include it in the description of this video. It's worth watching, I think. Okay. So next question. What's wrong with Chile? Despite backsliding recently, isn't it still by far the most freedom-oriented country in Latin America? It's also very safe and has a variety of climates to suit any lifestyle, but for some reason, it's rarely mentioned as an option anymore.
Well, Chile is a different kind of country. It's very isolated by the Andes on one side and by the Atacama Desert on the other and the ocean on the other. So it's an isolated little country. And yes, it's very beautiful. It's like California and South America. I mean, it's just a fantastic place from that point of view. But it's never been a pro-freedom country. I mean, it's, for instance, it may be the most religious country in South America, which means that it's dominated by the Catholic Church, especially by a very radical Catholic organization called Opus Dei, which is headquartered in Chile. So no, it's not very intellectually free, never has been. And the Chileans, I found, would have a high regard for the Carabinieri and the police and the army. which is not a particularly good thing, especially in South America. So no, it's not freedom-oriented from that point of view. Look, the best thing that ever happened to Chile was Augusto Pinochet, who was a general that brought down advisors from Milton Friedman's school of economics, which is generally pretty good, not monetarily, which is what he was famous for, but from other things. Friedman was really good. And Pinochet totally transformed the Chilean economy in the 70s. And it went from a beautiful, but totally backwater shithole that had nothing but some miscellaneous copper mines to being by far the most economically and technologically advanced country in Latin America because of Pinochet. And of course, Pinochet was made into a new Hitler and all this type of thing because of what he did. Yeah, he killed a couple thousand people. That's par for the course in Latin America. But actually, a couple thousand people, that's a pretty small toll in Latin American terms.
It is.
And it's not even a rounding error in Africa terms. But although Pinochet did more things that were good for Chile than any other president or whatever has done ever in Latin America that I know of, he's been made into a world-class criminal. So they're rolling that back. Things got too good for too long in Chile, too prosperous. So, they've elected a couple communists and want to change the Constitution now so they can be go back to being a socialist shithole. Well, it's still a beautiful country. And look, it's okay, but it's not what it used to be a few years ago.
My understanding is that they handled the lockdowns, the COVID stuff really poorly. It was a really unpleasant city to be in. Santiago was a very pleasant city to be in before that, I would say. So there's that. And then there's like is it the Mapuches or whatever, the natives? There's a lot of like.
In the South.
Yeah, it's a big problem with them, right? Isn't there?
Yeah, that's right. This is one of the big problems in a lot of countries in Latin America. You're an Indian country. And in Chile, the southern part of the country is Indian country, where mainly one tribe called the Mapuches, still don't like the Spanish conquerors and would really like to break off, their third of the country from the rest of the country. And I don't know, go back to pounding the earth with sticks or something, whatever they did before the conquistadors arrived. Yes, and I know the conquistadors were nasty and did a lot. Anyway, don't want to get into that. But, Indian problems are real problems in a lot of Latin American countries. The south of Chile is one of them. Parts of Argentina are others. Bolivia, big Indian problems. Peru, Ecuador, both have big Indian problems. So, that's right.
All right, next question. Are we seeing the rise of a global financial regulator with the FSB, which is the Financial Stability Board? It's like a UN governance structure organization, I guess. He says it seems to be ever increasing in its scope and power from bail-in legislation to current crypto regulations push.
Absolutely correct. It wasn't too long ago when you could transfer money anywhere and nobody asked you any questions, and it was pretty easy. Now you've got to tell, where's the money going? For what reason? Where'd you get it? Can you prove that you paid taxes on it? I mean, it's become, quite a nuisance trying to transfer money internationally and carrying money across borders. You have to report whether you have, depending on the country, but $3,000, generally $10,000 US or some other equivalent. Yes, and this is just one more thing. And of course, there's a new regime that the UN is trying to put into effect so that there's a minimum international tax that has to be paid. So locating your company, domiciling it and a tax haven won't do you much good, if any good anymore. So yeah, these governments are like a cancer that are infecting the whole world. And it's a trend that's been growing for the last 100 years, and it's accelerating. So it's a real problem.
Okay. This guy says he uses SWP Cayman for some gold storage. And he said, but following the not all eggs in one basket thought, are there any other places other than SWP that you recommend in Canada, Panama, or Mexico?
I understand. I don't have firsthand knowledge, but there's an outfit or two in Singapore that allow for storage and transfer of gold and silver. That's worth investigating. I can't say anything about them personally. Where else can you go? I don't know. Do you know of any other competitors to SWP out there, which is in the Cayman Islands?
There's a company in the US that called Money and Metals, I think it is, that has a lot of the same services. Of course, it's domiciled in the US, but it might be a better option than just having it in a US bank account. It's not outside of the arm of the US, but and then other than that, I've heard about, I can't remember the name of the place in Singapore that I've heard a lot of very positive things about. But I mean, if I guess you really want to be hedged, having something in the, in this hemisphere and then having something else in Asia might be a good way to play it. Singapore's regulatory structure is clear and reliable, and that's a good environment, I think, to have some gold.
I think that makes sense, actually. Have to look into the outfit in Singapore and find out more about them.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Does Doug think the same process that happened to citizens with Mao, Hitler, and Pol Pot will happen in the US? And if so, will it make a difference if we leave?
Well, the US actually is different from any other country in the world. Its founding principles were different, and the way it grew up was different. And so I'd like to be more optimistic about the US. But the trend in the US is terrible. The fact that the average American voter, presumably, I mean, of course, there was fraud in the elections perpetrated, well, by both parties, but the Democrats are much more egregious about this than the Republicans are. And of course, the bad guys have control of the apparatus of the state at this point. And once you have control of the apparatus of the state, you can basically do whatever you want in all kinds of ways. So yeah, the US is different and better, but the bad guys have control, and I don't think they're going to let go of control. So even if the Republicans are elected in 2024, I mean, it's the Republicans are really just collectivists and statists, somewhat light and somewhat different. So the U.S. is on the wrong trend. Could what happened in China and Germany, Russia happen in the U.S.? Yeah, I think it could, very definitely. What do you think?
Well, I think one of the things he's talking, because he mentions Pol Pot in there, I'm just naturally thinking he's talking about, massacre more than anything else as part of it, and I, well,
you do have these people out there like the Black Lives Matter people and Antifa that are really trying, it seems they're trying to foment a race war. I mean, they really are actually trying to do that. So anything is possible.
Yeah, I think that's the bigger concern I'd have is that they're trying to foment the opposition internally, and then that goes to bad places. It's no way that ends well. And you would think that, it would be different maybe in the US because it's more of the melting pot kind of scenario, and everyone's kind of more, can identify themselves as primarily as Americans, not as, or something else. But certainly, obviously, that was the case in China. I mean, they were, I guess most of them are Han, so that didn't help.
No, didn't really help. No. And they really are, this race thing is being, they're really trying to boil the kettle with this race thing in all kinds of different ways, where if you watch commercials on US TV, you think, my God, 2/3 of the people and all the smart people in the US must be Blacks. And it looks like, or gay, yeah, for sure, or both, like that double diversity hire that worked for Pfizer,
Right.
So the trend is bad. And I've got to believe that although the average guy out there in flyover country is influenced by thinking, gee, all these Black doctors and lawyers and smart people I see in the commercials and everything like that, maybe there's some truth to it. But on the other hand, people say, this is not the way the world works. Fact is, Black people still generally hang out with other Black people, and white people hang out with other white people, generally speaking. It's not the way it's presented on TV. And, polls have been taken that ask Europeans who haven't been to the US, what percentage of the US are Black people? And they say 30 or 40%, because that's what they see in the media.
Interesting.
They presume is a correct representation.
But it's really like what, 12%, something like that?
Yeah, it's like 12%, exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah, and in my experience, most Black people are just normal people. That's all.
Yeah.
And nobody cares. But the way they're emphasizing race, it is actively polarizing both white and Black people at this point. So it's not good.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Is there such thing as an original thought? And if so, have you had any original thoughts?
Well, there are original thoughts. Einstein's E equals mc squared was, I guess, a classic original thought.
Yeah.
And thoughts were written down by many Greek philosophers. Whether somebody had thought them before, nobody had written them down before and promoted them before. So maybe thoughts, there aren't that many original thoughts. Maybe it's a question of who promotes the thought best as opposed to thinks it first. That's really important. I don't know. I'm not sure, frankly. You know what Leviticus said, there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah. Yeah, but there definitely are original ways of describing something that come through. And I think that's where you get the EMC, equals EMC squared thing. That's an original way of describing something. And then that formula, even if people had, which I don't know if they had that concept of relativity in their minds before, but you also see like really effective, as you were saying, promoters of ideas. What makes them really successful is that they can articulate something in a specific way that's unique and different than the way it had been articulated before, that all of a sudden clicks for people and changes, helps people adopt the idea, turns it more into a meme that can spread.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm always searching for original thoughts in my own mind, or at least new and different ways of saying something or perceiving something. Yeah. So I'm all for originality.
Are there any thoughts that you've had or ideas that you've communicated you feel were original?
Sometimes I've thought that was the case, but foolishly, I didn't write them down with that particular thought in mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely had ideas where I go, I believe sincerely that this idea is not one that I was given to me by others, but at the same time, when I'm thinking that, I'm confident that somebody else has thought that idea and even articulated that clearly to themselves and others. But trying to understand what's influencing my oking, was this original? Did it come from me or somewhere else?
I have exactly the same problem and thought process when that happens to me too. There's this, it was called the 100th monkey theory, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. Where one monkey finds something on one island, and then they said, and then monkeys on all the other islands, even without knowing what this
learns how to use a tool in a certain way or something like that, right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. And it spreads like a virus, even though there's no virus. It spreads it. It's
an interesting concept. Seems true. There's the whole concept of a zeitgeist even is like that in a way, you know?
Yeah, it is. Well, maybe it's like that old Clairol commercial. One girl tells another, tells another, tells another.
Clairol commercial. Definitely dating yourself with that one. All right. Next question. This guy, he asked ChatGTP what it would ask Doug. And it said, as a language model AI, I don't have personal opinions or emotions, but if I were to ask a question to Doug Casey, it would be, what do you consider to be the biggest economic and geopolitical trends shaping the world today and in the future? And how do you advise individuals to navigate these changes?
Well, biggest single trends in economics and geopolitics, I would say it's the growth of the state. I mean, the state's always been with us, but the main thing it always did in the past was, well, it's always had taxes and pogroms and confiscations and regulations, things of that nature, and wars, of course. But the big trend in the world today is the growth of the state as an institution into all areas, especially economic areas, all over the world, everywhere. Everybody thinks that the state is a cornucopia. I think that's the biggest single trend in the world today, and one that's been accelerating in growth for the last 100 years, roughly. That would be my answer, I think.
And how do you advise individuals to navigate that change or that trend?
Well, try not to play the game. Try not to comply. Try to say no more often. Try to privatize your assets so that they can't easily get a hold of them. And to, whenever possible, resist and don't comply. And yes, I know we're dealing with the Borg and resistance is futile, but you have to anyway.
Try. I agree. Well, that was a decent question from ChatGTP, don't you think? I mean, it's kind of.
I thought it was.
Yeah. All right.
It's quite clever, and it's going to get more clever rapidly, I'm sure.
It is. And you might have seen all these stories about how the built-in bias in it has just gotten to an extreme state. Like they ask it to write something talking about a poem or something, or Dr. Seuss story that's positive about Donald Trump, and it says it won't do it, refuses it because he's a hateful person. And then it asks it to do about Biden, does it no problem in the tone of Dr. Seuss, and many things like that it does. And describe the downside of transgenderism, and it said, well, no, I won't do that. It won't discuss it. So it's built-in bias pretty extreme at this point already.
It's amazing. The wokesters and other bad guys have really captured so many things in society. It's going to be hard to turn it around. It really is. It's going to have to collapse. I don't think we can turn it around. I mean, I like to talk to optimistic people like, Paul Rosenberg, for instance, is quite optimistic about being able to do this. But I think it's got to collapse before there's any hope of turning things around. And even then, it's questionable.
I agree. Okay. As Doug is scanning the horizon for potential stocks to add to his stock picks, I wonder if he might also look at, I don't want to mention the specific stock, but is there anything on the ASX that you typically look at? Is that Australian exchange on your radar generally?
Sadly, not too much. Like Pakistan is experiencing extreme economic discomfort at the moment. And they have a stock exchange in Karachi. And there are probably some Pakistani stocks that are really, really cheap right now. But I just can't watch all of them. How do you do that? It's tough.
Yeah. Yep. So your niche is in the Canadian market, right? As far as the resource stocks go.
Yeah, it really is. The Australian market is a little world of its own. And I will comment that as a general rule, Australian stocks, apples to apples, as much as possible, tend to be much cheaper than Canadian stocks or American stocks. So actually, if I was clever, I would pay much more attention to Australian stocks because they're generally better value because people don't watch them. Well, much as I don't.
Case in point. Case in point.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. This guy's asking about Uruguay in 10, 20, and 30 years. What are your thoughts about foreign property rights, and the biggest risk to foreign investors in land there over that time period?
Well, there's a friend of ours we're going to be dining with soon, who's of the opinion, he's Dutch, and he's of the opinion that the population of Uruguay is going to double in the next 10 or 20 years from immigration, basically from North America and Europe. And his opinion is that the type of people that are going to emigrate here are going to be our kind of people, pro-freedom people, because this probably is the freest country in Latin America. Well, it's hard to say. There's so many parameters and different parts, but still, it probably is. So that's the case for optimism for Uruguay. And it's rural, which is good. Rural countries generally don't do big, stupid revolutions. It's urban countries that tend to do that type of thing more. So, I'm reasonably comfortable in Uruguay, but this is still Latin America where, an election can change anything.
Yeah, but there's it's a tradition of civility among the different parties, even, where you see a bunch of the former presidents on stage and being there, it seems totally legitimate, their respect for one another, even when they're on totally different sides of the political spectrum. It seems it's just much more civil, I think.
Yeah, it's a little country that doesn't have a big class divide at all, really. So, it's pretty mellow. This is the kind of place that doesn't have riots or massive protests. It's not like Argentina that way.
Right. Yeah. Okay, good. Next question. It's often been said that the best defense is a good offense. So we talk about a lot of actions that could be considered defensive moves, like relocating to rural properties, various self-sufficient strategies, internationalizing the different parts of one's life, et cetera. Clearly, all these have identifiable positive benefits. In addition to these moves, what are the best offensive moves one should consider taking? Some ideas I have: increasing profits, establishing a network of like-minded folks, expanding one's positive influence over the world, etc. But what are some others?
Well, I think you mentioned all of them. Although I'd throw in there trying to gain as much personal knowledge as you can, which will better enable you to take advantage of opportunities when they pop up. If you have a lot of knowledge, you're better prepared to see the opportunity. It's there for everybody, but not everybody can see the opportunity. So did he mention self-education?
Did not say that here. Nope, he did not.
Other than that, I think it's a pretty complete list.
Yeah, I think the biggest that stood out to me about this question was, even the notion of like offensive versus defensive is, I don't think that that's really the right way to even think of it, just because they're almost like they're by nature reactionary to what's happening. You know what I mean? And so the defensive moves, you could argue, I think the defensive moves I have made have all been offensive, actually. Offensive, but not in opposition to all the mess of the world, but to building something great for myself. And so I don't know. I just don't like the term offense, defense, I guess, in that, because I don't want to be defined by my opposition.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I guess it's one reason why I'm partial to a Taoist way of looking at things, where let the rhinoceros fight the elephant, but I'd rather live in another reality, like smoke that smoke that's coming up from a fire. Doesn't care if the rhino or the elephant wins when they're having a fight. I like to put myself in that position as much as possible.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Anne asks about income property. Is there anywhere that you would be buying right now, income property?
Well, once again, there's a whole world, big market, lots of different types of income property. Seems to me that office buildings are a dead duck for a long time to come. And there's lots and lots of office buildings, so I wouldn't want to be there, even if they kind of look cheap. I mean, there was a time when Detroit was down and out. Maybe it still is down and out in relative terms anyway. But I remember there was a 40-story office building in Detroit that you could have bought for $3 million.
Wow.
So, probably looked like a great income deal at one point before all the telesales. So, well, you can use agriculture as an income deal, but you got to manage agriculture. And there's a lot of problems with agriculture. There's no easy businesses. I think the easiest agricultural income project is trees, probably.
Yeah, the eucalyptus stuff. I was recently looking at some of those investment options around that here, and it's interesting. It's pretty compelling, actually.
Yeah. There's a lot of use for good timber, and not too terribly many things can go wrong with it. And I think trees are probably the best agricultural thing for the investor, the non-agricultural professional. But what other kind of income properties are there? I don't like the idea of owning apartments, because when a lot of people are losing their jobs, standard of living is going down, there can be all kinds of problems collecting the rent and with the government. So don't like that particularly much. Don't like retail properties very much, since I'm a bear. It's a problem.
Yeah. Okay.
For a while, a great deal were those storage units, the ones that you rent for.
Self-storage.
That was a great gig for a while. Maybe it still is in some places. Trailer parks were a great deal for a while too, because you rent the pad and people put their trailer on it. And if they don't pay the pad fees, then you confiscate your trailer. Kind of a sad business from that point of view, but
yeah,
pretty profitable for the people who rent it. But I don't know if those are still good businesses now or not.
I think the price of a lot of those has gone up a lot. Somebody in our file was talking about RV parks recently, and having stayed in lots of RV parks over the last couple of years, Jane and I often comment about how they would be great businesses, because where they charge you as much as you might pay for a hotel room, then they give you a piece of of ground to park on and plug your electricity into overnight. You take all your, and then you leave the next morning. There's no housekeeping or any of that. And usually if there's one employee, maybe not even that, just a kind of a, one caretaker of some kind. And seems like a very simple business, and the yield on it could be, it depends on how, if they're all bid up too much now, but those are interesting businesses, I think.
That's a good point. Yeah, that too. I guess that's where I'd be looking.
Okay. This person obviously didn't hear our one episode where we talked about this, but Doug, what are your thoughts on Peter Zeihan? Assuming you know him, he said he's pessimistic short term, but long term says America is in a great position.
Well, he's kind of blossomed upon the scene in recent years. I don't know who he is. I couldn't help myself. I said, who is this guy? So I looked him up on Google, and there's no information about him. He's from Iowa. He's from your part of the world, actually, it turns out.
Well, if you wanted to obscure, make yourself seem your past obscure, you say you're from Iowa, because everybody goes, well, that's fine. You don't even worry about it. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Iowa seems so wholesome.
Benign. Yeah.
But I've watched a number of his videos, and one thing, he's a great showman. He's very histrionic. It's like he's taking acting lessons, which
Yes,
frankly
yes.
annoys me. And I don't trust anybody that has a man bun. You know, I mean that's almost like, it's almost as bad as taking your name and then hyphenating it with another name like Bankman-Fried. It's like you're trying to advertise, you're trying to tell something.
Mm-hmm.
Lives in Boulder, Colorado. That's one thing that is evident about him, which is it's one of the people's republics in Colorado. I mean, could it be the most lefty town in the U.S.? Well,
It's
maybe.
close.
Boulder's ultra lefty,
Yeah.
and but of course, my friends that used to run Soldier of Fortune magazine also lived in Boulder, but they were,
That was the old Boulder. That was the old Boulder.
Yeah, and they were outliers anyway. But it seems like he grabs a fact and researches a fact, and it's interesting. Oh, here's some data expanding on, some trend in the world. Okay, that's fair enough. I think he's a hustler. I don't know what his background is. I don't know where he's gone. Or
we know Stratford.
He used to
right?
work for George Friedman, right?
Yeah. Yes, that's one thing.
What
we
else? Is that a qualification, working for Friedman?
I mean, well, that is the kind of work that geopolitical work is what they did and what they were good at. So he learned the basics of it in a good shop, but that shop is known for being connected to intel agencies, isn't it?
Yeah. And where did he get his money? I mean, how does he get his money now? Yeah, he's got some books, but there's really not any money in books anymore. So can't support yourself that way. Doesn't have a newsletter to sell. All the things he says have an underlying statist tone to them, and no cosmic breakthroughs that he makes. I don't know if he's traveled anywhere or even been in the military.
No, I don't think so. He hasn't been in the military, and I don't know about his travels, but he is very smart. He comes off as very knowledgeable when he's talking about something. It's practiced, and so he comes off as very, very intelligent. And the thing that is, I think, intoxicating about him to people is his sense of confidence about what he's saying. He is certain of everything he says. You know what I mean? He is like, there's no doubt in his mind. He's totally sure he's correct.
People love certainty, which is incredibly stupid, but they do love certainty. And I'm afraid that Peter, who I don't know, although my friends at Agora, anyway, they're doing things with him because he's a talent, but he doesn't know anything about investing. So I don't know, but he's become a personality. And I'm sure that I just get the impression that as much as he must love living in the People's Republic of Boulder, he'd really like to live someplace within the Beltway and be consulted by high government officials. That's what he'd really like. That's my impression. Maybe I'm dead wrong. Maybe he's the nicest, soundest guy in the world, but I don't think so. He's just too damn slick and glib.
Yeah, and he also his basic, and I've been following him for at least 5 years because it stood out as interesting when I first came across him, because his ideas again, it's the clarity of his thinking and his confidence in his thinking seemed solid, but then there were always things that didn't make sense, like he wasn't considering. And so I have not found over this entire time of observing him any basic point of view that would not be approved by that the state, that the US government would not want its citizens to believe. Like they want them to believe that China's completely and utterly doomed. Nobody on earth is a threat to the US, and there's going to be huge chaos that's coming, but the US is going to be fine. Like, isn't that what they'd want you to think? I mean,
yeah, it does. He comes down on all the politically correct sides of things, like the Ukraine, Russia thing is another example.
Yeah, he's been a big propagator of, I think, total misinformation about how well Ukraine's been doing in this whole thing. And, which led to the death of hundreds of thousands of soldiers on their side, it seems. So in any case, okay, next question. Doug, are you familiar with Alexander Dugin's, with him or any of his work? It's something he calls fourth political theory.
I'm not, actually.
Okay. You know, Alexander Dugin is like the guy who reportedly is like really close to Putin, and who there was his daughter was assassinated by some Ukrainian operatives in an effort to assassinate him maybe 3 months ago. So that's where.
Oh, I have heard of him now, but I don't know anything about him. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to decipher his fourth political theory. I tried. It's not clear to me, honestly. Okay, next question. Let's see. Okay, so he says, well, I should probably say that for a VIP call instead. I think I'll skip to the next one. Doug, have you ever dropped acid or taken any other mind expanding or allegedly mind expanding drugs?
Yeah, some, but by no means all. And there's a wide variety of them. I mean, I'm trying to think of the name of the MDs that wrote 2 volumes like that with hundreds of mind expanding drugs of many, many descriptions that can be formulated in a laboratory. So there's no place, it's a vast cornucopia that you can go out and experiment with. But I don't know. If I can find a drug like the one that Charles Knight discovers and promotes in our second novel, Drug Lord, yeah, I would do that drug, no question. But generally speaking, I like to stay away from drugs because they cloud your mind. And so, I'm all for everybody doing them, experimenting them. I certainly have, but it's not my thing.
Yeah. It's not really a risk-free proposition either. Like, I think
No, it's not.
No. Yeah. Okay. Next question. This guy says, there's something I wanted to understand for a long time now, but never hear an explanation. Hopefully Doug might know one, or at least opine. He says, I am from Croatia, which has been in EU for some time, and now it entered Eurozone, meaning it adopted the euro instead of the kuna as official currency. My gut feeling tells me, based on other countries' experience, that euro is not good for us. Things get more expensive, but I'm not able to understand nor explain why, apart from the loss of monetary sovereignty. Which countries actually benefit from the euro and why? So yeah, I guess he's trying to communicate. He's trying to understand what he knows intuitively is bad about that, and so he understands it and explain it to others.
Yeah. Okay. That's a very honest and intelligent question. The problem with the euro is that, as I've said before, if the dollar is an IOU nothing, which is an accurate description of the dollar, the euro is a who owes you nothing. So that there's not even, it's just a bunch of governments that don't even share responsibility or views, that the euro is on its way to becoming a dead duck. So don't put any long-term store or savings in the euro. That's number one. And if you want to save, I know if you're a European or Croatian, the Europeans, the euro is what you're supposed to save your excess production in. I would transfer it into gold and silver.
Yeah.
At this point. So, and I like Croatia. I've been there a couple times, and it's a pleasant enough place. But
what does the country give up by? What does that country give up by adopting the euro, and what does it gain? And and why do countries, rich countries, even like? I can understand maybe why poor countries might get in, like Greece, because essentially gets, subsidized by Germans in some way, although it also increases the price of everything there. But why does Denmark stay out of it? Rich countries like that,
well, that's right, and Norway. Well, yeah. I think they can see that it's an Esperanto currency. It's artificially created. It's going to come to a bad end. There's no question about it. I mean, the question that nobody's asking is, look, the world is going to go back to gold. I mean, for reasons that we described in a podcast, was it yesterday or the day before?
Yep. Day before.
One or two of them, whatever. So buy gold, small gold coins, and beat the last minute rush. And if I was the Croatian government at this point, I would say, sure, you can use the euro, that's fine. But Croatia is an independent country, and we're going to have a Croatian, I don't know what they called their
Looks like a kuna.
A kuna. Yes, we're going to have a gold-backed kuna, and the central bank will redeem each kuna for a fixed amount of gold. That's what they should do. Yeah, sure, you can use euros, but we also have kunas for the benefit of our people. That's how you solve the problem. That's what should happen. But what should happen and what will happen are two very different things.
Always are. Okay. Last question, Doug. Have you ever made an investment into a company that ended up being a fraud? If so, what were the lessons learned for future investments?
Yes, frauds. Stock market is rife with them. I've actually dodged some bullets on stock market frauds where I could have put money in them and didn't, and they blew up, as they always do. But I've got to say, one of my biggest and best hits was a massive fraud, and that was Bre-X. Because when did Bre-X occur? Oh, we're talking 20 or 30 years ago. But it was the greatest fraud in mining history. And of course, the mining business, more than most, is full of frauds. I mean, full of frauds of all types. And I put a lot of money in Bre-X when I was trading at about $1, roughly speaking. That's when I started buying it. And did Bre-X run to about 150 or 250? Anyway, that was one of my big long ball home runs. Just buying it in the open market because the story was so good that I've got to jump on this thing. And I sold it, not because I knew it was a fraud, not because it was discovered as a fraud, just because the market cap of the thing was bigger than that of Freeport-McMoRan, which has spent billions of dollars, building a giant copper gold mine in Indonesia. And I said, well, this makes no sense to hold a drill hole play that's worth more than Freeport, paying a dividend and so forth. So I just sold it. I think it's too expensive. I didn't know it was a fraud when I bought it or when I sold it. But a fraud can be very good to you or anybody.
And what did you, is there any lessons you learned from the ones that you missed, where you might have been swept up in?
Yeah, I'm trying to make my life simpler and easier. And one way you do that is good people make for good business and bad people make for bad business. Just inevitably, absolutely in the long run. So I'm just trying to stay away from people that I don't think are just really solid from every point of view. I mean, look, out of these 9 Ps that I've promoted as things that you should look at before you invest in any small companies, generally speaking. Number 1 is people. It's worth more than the other 8 things together, all of which are important, but it's people.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the most successful speculator investors that I know is an Indian guy. Came from Uganda originally when Idi Amin kicked all the Indians out of Uganda, and he landed in Vancouver penniless. And, one thing he figured out is who are the winners? Who are the really smart guys? He's a good analyst of people. And he just made himself into their best friends. People like Ross Beatty and Lucas Lundin and guys like that, where, he was like their go-to guy. And, he got into everything that they were doing, and he's made millions and millions of dollars. He doesn't know anything actually about any of this. All he knew was stick with the right people. And he's absolutely right.
Yeah, it makes sense because, I think we think of a fraud as like, we think of like, we think of like the Madoff thing obviously is closely associated with him, but we almost think it is something separate from a person. It's the person that was a fraud. It wasn't the deal that was a fraud. And if you associate with people who are, the Sam Bankman-Fried, same thing. Like it's if he'd had an ethical, higher character person in that role, that wouldn't have happened. So by just focusing on the people, looking for people that can be relied upon because of their own character, I think you're best served.
It really makes life simpler and easier. Leaves you more time for more important things.
Okay. All right. Well, good. Well, we'll leave it there for today, Doug. Thank you very much and have a great weekend.
Thanks, Matt. Same to you.